The ranch sat in silence, a patch of stubborn land clinging to life at the edge of the desert. Winds carried dust across the weathered fences, rattling wood that had long ago lost its shine. Days bled into nights without distinction, marked only by the movements of one man. His life was a pattern of repetition, feeding the animals, mending fences, walking the boundary lines, and returning to a house that held only echoes. Scars across his hands and the stiffness in his gait whispered of battles survived, but the stillness in his eyes spoke louder of what he had lost. A photograph sat near his bed, edges curled with age, and beside it, a music box unopened for decades. Each day was lived not in pursuit of tomorrow, but in memory of what once was. One night, movement stirred on the horizon. He noticed faint glimmers weaving across the desert, too deliberate to be the wandering of beasts. Instinct honed from years of soldiering pushed him to his rifle, eyes narrowing as the shapes grew distinct. Figures emerged, weary and unsteady, until 11 of them stood outside his gate. Their skin bore strange hues, their eyes held a faint, unnatural glow, and their clothes hung tattered as if stripped by war and exile. They were alien, yet not unknown, widows of the same conflict that had carved scars into his flesh. Their voices came halting, broken but clear enough. They begged for shelter, for water, for safety. His first thought was refusal. Trouble followed outsiders, and he had lived too long away from entanglement. Yet their faces mirrored the same emptiness that lived in him, the hollow ache of lives torn apart. Against his own instinct, he opened the gate, allowing them in with the warning it was for one night only. Still, even in his silence, something had shifted, and the ranch no longer felt entirely his alone. Dawn brought no departure. The 11 widows remained near the barn, gathered close as if clinging to one another for strength. He watched them from the porch, the rifle resting at his side, the instinct to send them away wrestling with the image of their thin hands, stitching torn garments, and drawing water without being asked. They did not sit idle. One tended to the animals with gentle care, another patched the broken tools he had left rusting by the shed, while a third sprinkled a strange mineral into the soil that seemed to drink it eagerly. They worked as though they belonged, yet carried themselves with the heaviness of those who had lost everything. It was only later, as the sun rose higher, that he learned who they truly were. Each of them had lost a husband in the same war that had hollowed him out. Warriors cut down by the same enemy that had stolen his comrades. Different worlds, different species, but the grief was identical, raw, unending, and carved into every gesture. They sang mourning songs in low tones at dusk, weaving stones into patterns on the ground as memorials. He recognized in those rituals the same desperate need he had once tried to silence with his long solitude. Though words rarely passed his lips, he began to let them stay. They earned their place by labor, and slowly his ranch began to change. Crops grew stronger with their knowledge. The house filled with faint laughter when one of them slipped repairing the roof and cursed in her tongue, drawing from him the first unguarded chuckle in years. Another left food at his door when he forgot to eat, echoing a kindness once shown by his wife. At night, he would sit outside, pretending to stare at the horizon while listening to their voices rise in song. The emptiness he had carried like armor began to crack, and what poured in was not pain but the faint warmth of belonging. For the first time in decades, the land felt alive, and the silence he had wrapped himself in no longer seemed impenetrable. Word of their presence traveled farther than he expected. Strangers passed along rumors of alien widows sheltered on a lonely ranch, and not all who heard were harmless. Raiders from the fringes, men who thrived on fear and profit, set their sights on the place. The first signs came quietly, a set of unfamiliar tracks near the outer fence, a single rifle shot cracking the night sky as if to remind him they were being watched, and a neighbor who came by with forced politeness to warn that harboring outsiders would invite ruin. The rancher weighed the words in silence, torn between the instinct to push the widows away and the growing bond he could no longer deny. Sending them off would mean condemning them to death, and though he had lived in silence to avoid war, He knew he could not abandon them. The widows did not cower. They revealed fragments of knowledge carried from their fallen husbands, memories of strategies and survival skills passed on through ritual. They offered not only gratitude but readiness, vowing to fight if danger came. Something stirred in him at their resolve, the dormant part of himself that had once stood on battlefields, scarred but unbroken. He began to prepare with them, showing them the use of rifles, the angles of cover, the patience of waiting for the right shot. They taught him their own methods, how to move unseen in open ground, how to weave signals into gestures, how to lay simple but effective traps. Together, they reinforced fences, dug shallow trenches, and turned the humble ranch into something that could endure a storm. Each day of preparation stripped away another layer of his isolation. Silence no longer marked despair but discipline, the focus of a soldier with purpose. The widows mirrored his determination, meeting his quiet with trust and their own resilience. When dust finally rose on the horizon and the raiders appeared as dark figures against the setting sun, he stood at the gate with his rifle, the widows arrayed beside him. The years of stillness had ended, and the ranch was no longer only his refuge. It had become a place worth defending. The attack came swift and vicious, but the ranch did not break. Shots rang out from the ridges, the widows moving with precision learned in long nights of practice, their strange cries rising above the crack of rifles. The raiders had expected frightened refugees and a broken old man, yet they met a defense sharp as iron. The rancher's silence shattered in the thunder of commands barked across the field, his voice carrying the weight of experience and unyielding will. He moved like the soldier he had once been, every shot measured, every decision deliberate. The widows matched his resolve, fighting not only for survival but for the fragile hope they had built under his roof. The raiders faltered, shaken by the unity of those they thought weak. One by one, they fell or fled, leaving only the dust of their retreat. When the last shot faded, quiet returned to the land, but it was no longer the hollow silence of solitude. It was the stillness after a storm, a calm born from victory shared. The ranch bore scars, splintered wood, scorched earth, blood in the dust, but it still stood, and so did those who called it home. In the aftermath, the widows gathered around him, their gratitude unspoken yet heavy in their eyes. They had come seeking shelter and found instead a protector who had rediscovered his purpose through them. He had opened his gate reluctantly, but now he understood what it meant. The ranch was no longer just his, it was theirs. The silence he once clung to had been replaced by voices, by labor shared, by songs rising into the night sky. For the first time in decades, he was not alone. The war had taken much, but from its ashes had grown something stronger than grief, a family bound not by blood, but by survival, trust, and the choice to stand together.